Well, Nate, help us out. Kick it off from the beginning. Tell us about who you are.
Before
what
I do,
built
though,
you?
can I just say,
Yes.
like, listening to Scott and, like, the wisdom that he shared was awesome. Years ago, I ended up climbing and summiting the Grand Teton. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it's got some sheer and some complex places that you actually make the approach with. And fortunately, we had a guide on that mountain that, like, knew all of the ways to make it safely. And this individual had been up the mountain and down the mountain, like, from all sides. And Scott has done that. And so, like, the wisdom was just so right on. But thank you, Scott. That was awesome.
One more time for Scott Peterson.
So about me, I'm not sure where to start. I'm an Ogden native. For any of you who love Ogden like I do, Ogden made. And yeah, Ogden's a great place. I love Ogden because, you know, it's got this theme that, you know, even the branding of Ogden is still untamed, and that's a little bit of how I feel about myself. And so I love to hail from Ogden. I don't know if you all know this little tidbit, but Al Capone once said, "Don't go to Ogden, you'll get shot." And so, you know, that's a fun little thing. Grew up there, and then, you know, I studied here at the university at BYU here in Provo, and then that's where I met my lovely wife, and she's not here, but she's awesome. I haven't been able to pull her quite back to Ogden, so I'm like making my way from Provo to Orem, American Fork, Highland, and we've kind of stuck in that little area back there. Even though I love it. But my wife is probably the greatest, well, not probably, she is the greatest thing to ever happen to me. She's the greatest human being to have encountered in my life. And just slightly less amazing are my 6 kids that I have. And they are the apple of my eye. Just love, I think being a dad is, of all the things that I've done, the thing that I feel the most grateful for. And if I did nothing else but had the opportunity to be the father of those children, it would be a life worth lived.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. I love it. I love it. So talk to us about your entrepreneurial world. Where did the passion for entrepreneurship come from? What was your first startup? Give us the lowdown.
You know, it's an interesting question. When we were talking about this, it's hard for me to know exactly when, like, this thing burst in me and why. I think maybe part of it, some of you may know, here in Utah, there are 2 Gardners. I'm maybe the less known Gardner. The one that is more known is my brother JD. He's always had this, and he actually is the founder with his wife of Costa Vida. I was a founding team member, but JD, when we were really little, he's my older brother by 5 years, we were always selling popsicles or, you know, suckers or this thing that you shouldn't sell to you know, that nobody would want to buy, and he somehow figured out a way to do it. And so, like, I think having a brother like that was probably like an impetus. And then later on, you know, obviously I've realized that entrepreneurism isn't actually just about selling something. It's about building something meaningful and building something that really solves a problem. And the reason why people buy it is because you're solving a problem that they really have. And so I think at some point my maturity in understanding, like, what is at the essence of being an entrepreneur really landed that being an entrepreneur is sort of like the hero's journey. It's like the hero's arc in a lot of ways, because the hero sort of, she sees something wrong in the world and she says, I've got to go, like, fix that thing, right? The interesting thing is that she immediately finds herself in hell, the underworld, because everything that's wrong with the world that she sees is actually, like, against her, right? And so usually in that hero's arc, when the world becomes right is also when something gets right in her. And so I think that's been my experience as well as an entrepreneur. And we'll kind of cover a little bit of that, I think. But that experience of really having that thing change you and also change the world to be a better place is something that as an entrepreneur I've loved to be a part of, and even though you find yourself in hell a lot of the time. So
I don't think you could have summed up entrepreneurship better.
Yep.
That was brilliant. Talk to us about MX. You're at MX now.
Yep.
What is MX? What do you do? Why do you enjoy it? Why did you choose MX? So many questions.
Well, so MX is a really special place. I wish everybody had a chance to come and work at MX. My original reason for choosing MX was because I met the founder, Ryan Caldwell. And if you haven't met Ryan, he's a dear friend. He is just a mountain of a human, both physically and also just in his humanity. And he's somebody who is profoundly connected into like this thesis of changing the arc of humanity for better. And as a result, he's also incredibly intense, particularly in the early days when he and I met. And so when I heard the thesis, Then Money Desktop, of the idea that we could basically take the power of data, transactional and financial data, and form that in ways that improved money experiences for individuals so that we could empower financial strength. And that core idea, maybe not as well articulated as we can now, like I just did, but that concept, it really resonated because, financial meagerness, financial challenges, financial stress is one of the most profound human problems that we experience. And it doesn't just manifest itself in an isolated way. It has these cascading impacts into every facet of life. It cascades into the family. And as I mentioned, family means a lot to me, and I think family means a lot to the fundamental building blocks of society. It's a really important construct of how we learn, first guiding principles. So family is a place that it impacts individual health, both mental and just physical health, how people eat, how people choose to take care of their bodies, how they choose to take care of one another. And I'm a real student of culture and how cultures get built inside of companies. And one of the statistics that I think is really interesting about finances is that there are a lot of different ways that we've measured this, but one statistic says that 80%, up to 80% of people live paycheck to paycheck. 50% do that regardless of income. So if you think about the anesthesiologists of the world, 50% of those are living paycheck to paycheck. Now they've got a horizon of buffer that may be a little bit different than someone who's making, $50,000 a year. But the stress that creates is actually a pretty significant thing. It manifests in all these ways that we talked about. One of the things you want to create inside of a company is you want to create an environment where people are fearless in the way that they think about informing the business on how it can become a better place of work and how you can solve problems better. But if you think about how fear is activated when someone is living paycheck to paycheck about potentially losing their job, and how that might shut down somebody's intention of actually like saying, hey, let me tell the truth. Let me actually challenge the status quo. Let me challenge my boss. Let me challenge what we're doing. Then you put a lot of companies at risk that you're really not solving the problem you ought to solve. And we're building a lot of powerful technologies these days. So that's part of the reason why I chose MX, was that it's pervasive impact. And it's having that impact, which is awesome.
And it sounds like you've always been kind of passionate about finances. I know at Costa Vida you were very passionate about equal pay and making sure that workers were compensated fairly. Where did that journey take you in that battle to make sure employees were paid what they're worth?
Well, so I think one of the things that was part of the thesis there wasn't just that we had like a strong notion of how people got paid, but really the concept around being able to attract talent and being able to like really think about how you get great talent in. The more somebody actually has the ability to earn, the greater likelihood that they're going to invest skills in the things that they actually do, and they're going to invest in their capacity. You look at other restaurants that do this really well, Chick-fil-A, In-N-Out, they pay their people at an incredible rate. And what does that do? But that actually brings really incredible people at very junior positions, because these are usually individuals who may not have had a lot of experience, that may be first-time worker, maybe like early employment for them. And so trying to figure out how do you bring in individuals who really have the thesis of care and of quality and of wanting to be able to take care of the customer, and then compensate them in a way that they feel like they're that they can take care of things at home and they can actually perform well at work. And so I think that just the notion of how do you optimize for people's financial success, you can then ask a lot of those individuals to perform as well. And they want to be challenged, right? So that type of individual wants to be asked. And so there were those things that we did, and then there were some other things that we ended up doing that I thought was great, and that was the way that we looked at how we could help people professionally grow. So we did a lot of skills training and a lot of development and whatnot inside of the restaurants, which was great.
So on this hero's journey, you mentioned it's when you find something right in the world, you also find something right in yourself. How do you encourage your employees, and how do you create a customer experience that guides both employees and the customers to find this right in the world and this right in themselves?
Yeah, thank you. Is there a timer, by the way? Because I can just go, and I just want to make sure that I'm... This one up here?
Yeah, so when it hits 12:30.
Okay, thank you. Well, so this isn't a new concept, but I think that it's one that a lot of that is easy to get wrong. It's something Scott talked about that I think is maybe some nuance that I'd like to apply, is that he talked about sales and sales being really important. And the reason why investors like to see your sales is that is a really easy way for them to get a sense of how validated it is that what you are doing is actually solving a real problem. But there is nuance in that you can have people buying what you're selling, and it actually doesn't solve the problem that you actually. And so one of the things is that is a continued process that occurs inside of a company, is validating well that you are actually solving the pain that you have hypothesized that you want to sell or that you want to solve. And I would actually argue that the earlier you can get really good at saying, let me just not show you why people are buying, or that people are buying, but let me show you why they're buying, that here is the pain, and let me show you a customer that actually tells you how we're solving that pain. Like an individual who can do that and do that over and over again, and then say, and by the way, here's how they're rebuying. Like, you'll protect your cap table, because when an investor puts his money in, your valuation will be higher, and your cap table will be able to remain in such a way that you're protected. But getting back to this question of how do you build a notion of customer success, it really does start with the first guiding principles that you think about internally in an organization as a people experience. I've always defined customer as anyone or any entity that has an expectation for how you will deliver. So taking this completely out of like the business world, my wife is my customer. She has expectations for how I will deliver. But I also have a responsibility for shaping those expectations honestly and genuinely. And so, that dialogue and that direct conversation that we have about what can be expected of me and vice versa is part of how you achieve success. Because success, with that thesis that a customer is anyone or any entity that has an expectation for how you will deliver, has a corollary to it, which is that success is equal to delivery minus expectations if delivery is equal to or greater than expectations. So when you think about that applied inside of business, your first customer is your employee. Your first customer is your team member. Your first customer is the person that you engage with inside of the problem-solving machine that is actually the business itself. And so if you can create first guiding principles or instill first guiding principles inside of your business that are agreed upon. So for example, at MX, one of those is objectivity and discourse. And what we talk about is that we will feel things as humans inside of a business that is naturally got tension in it because you're trying to solve problems and you've got things that are going to break along that way. But in that process of feeling emotion, how do we say, let's look at data. Let's try to be as objective as we possibly can at looking at the data. Let's understand that our emotions are going to naturally amplify biases that are actually, that we're not even conscious to, and that those biases will actually force me to see a perspective that may be different than yours. And so how do we try to both step into that conversation in an objective way? So that's one of our first guiding principles. Another is a founder's mindset. Because, Scott, does anybody care as much as a founder? No. Because you have invested in this way that you understand in the hero's journey that the responsibility is on your shoulders. And so, one of those lines in the founder's mindset, first guiding principle at MX is, if not me, then who? If not now, then when? Right? So we've instilled and talked about and canonized these first guiding principles as an important way for us to organize, to problem solve, to engage with one another, and really with the intent to foster this highly connected, highly communicative, highly problem-solving oriented team that when you are moving fast and when problems arise, that we're collectively talking about those, all with the objective that's saying people are buying from us, and we have all kinds of customers that are external, and that is the buying customer, the partner, the board, other investors, and we have a responsibility to deliver against the expectations that we've set in all of those different customer places. And that becomes highly complex because what you'll find as your company grows, it's easier to do this when you're small because the locus of influence is so tightly connected. There's not a conversation that you're not in if you're a founder. But as you scale to 50 employees, to 100 employees, to 300 employees, MX just crossed over 700 employees. We're closing in on 800, and we'll probably be in the thousands in this next year. That becomes a much more complex thing because now you have a lot of different points of view. You have a lot of different customers with maybe nuanced expectations. And so these first guiding principles become so critical to how you engage in ambiguity and how you actually have the customer's outcome of success be at the mind of every person there. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, no, it's very helpful. What are the challenges that you face running and growing a company?
Well, first of all, I would say, any object, if we took this object and we blew it up really fast, now it doesn't have the capacity to self-heal, but if we blew it up really fast, the integrity of this bottle would actually become questioned, right? It would become more brittle. It would be easier to puncture. And so when you grow an organization really rapidly, the integrity of all of that connective tissue, the values that you've actually instantiated as being really critical, the systems and processes that you've built, they all become challenged, right? The integrity of them become challenged. And so you're constantly in this battle. Thank goodness you have humans in the organization who are inclined around these first guiding principles as a way to self-heal and to actually go about saying, well, look, see this system or this process we had over here, it's no longer functioning for the size and scale of the organization. See this thing that we're doing over here, it no longer fits. See the product that we were selling into this market size right here, it actually doesn't serve the market at this level in a way that we would have expected. And so the constancy of scale, and when you're doing that at a rapid pace, you have to be just, the trust in your organization has to be really high, because you have to be able to move at a pace that's like really fast. There's a really wonderful story about the diamond trade, the Jewish diamond trade, that I think Clay Christensen talks about, or maybe it was Stephen Covey, one of those individuals that are really smart. Talks about how in the early days of like the Jewish diamond trade, they would actually hand over bags of diamonds, and there was no like, let me count this, let me check it before. They were able to exchange diamonds based upon the trust that what the person said it was the amount that it was going to be. And that becomes a really important component of scale. If you have low trust in an organization, because your say-to-do ratio, I talk about this a lot, say-to-do ratio is that you say you're going to do this, and you do what you say. If that ratio is really low, then you can imagine that trust does not exist at all in that system, right? And so I always ask the question about, to our people, to ourselves as an executive team, to myself, how high is my say-to-do ratio? If my say-to-do ratio is actually like really low, and I'm being honest with myself, then I'm probably not very trusted. And that probably means we're going to start moving a lot more slowly, because now you've got to do a lot of verification. Now there's a lot of like checking around. Now there's a lot of conversations that have to occur. And some other organization where there's really high trust because the say-to-do ratio is really high and the execution against those values is really high, then they'll move much more quickly. They'll solve problems more quickly. They'll be far more nimble, and they'll just outpace an organization that is void of trust.
One of your personal mottos is have an impact for good on humankind. What does that mean, and what does that look like in your current position at MX?
Well, I think going back again, I'm one of those individuals that just like always thinks about first guiding principles. Some people can go mad because I'm like almost oriented, I don't know, in my brain wired towards like, what are the first guiding principles of things? And, when as it relates to this topic of making the world a better place, there are principles that are virtuous in their inclination. Like I would say trust is one of those, right? When we have high trust with one another, then that generally has a virtuous spiral associated with it. Like things tend to be able to get better. There are things that are not virtuous, like being disingenuous or being the opposite of trustworthy, that incline ourselves to be kind of spiral downwards, right? And so when I think about that, I think about the kinds of businesses that we build. And this is where I think it's really interesting as entrepreneurs for you to think about. Oftentimes what happens in a company is that the importance of revenue ends up competing with the importance of the purpose of the organization. And so, I sort of ask myself this question of how is it that as entrepreneurs or as creators of the future of business, how is it that what we do, how do we keep the soul in the silicon? How do we have silicon with a soul? How do we have nobility in the businesses that we build? And how do we retain that when, Scott talked about the cap table. One of the challenges that an entrepreneur is always going to feel is, hey, I want to get money back. I want to pay back the investors with return, especially if there's an expectation there. So, that's a balance of how do you maintain the nobility of what it is that you're building and what you intended to solve in the first place, and along that hero's arc, doing it that makes the world a better place? And does the thesis of what you're actually doing, is it oriented around just like generating revenue, or is it oriented around like really trying to make the world a better place? And so I think that's a core question that I ask of myself. And when I am with other entrepreneurs, I ask that question of them, not from a position, because I've got my own problems, and am someone who's filled with all kinds of dissonance because I'm a human being. But in a genuine sense of honesty, I think one of the things that I ask is, are the things we building, and as we look with as far of a horizon we can actually look forward to, the kinds of things that will actually build the world better for humans and the next generation and the generation after that. And I just think those are questions that we ought to be asking of ourselves as we build. And so that's one way. And then I think the other one is just being a good dad. I think, and what I mean by being a good dad, it doesn't mean that I'm buying my kids cool stuff. It actually means that I'm intentional in the way that I engage with them when I talk to them. I think it also means that we be present. This morning I woke up and I was lying in bed just before I got out of bed, and I had this reflection and I remembered an interaction that I'd seen between two Buddhist monks, and it was a beautiful thing because it was like the most simple, mundane experience that it happens to us every day. They were walking towards each other, and as they approached to pass one another, they stopped. They stopped, and they looked at each other, and they bowed. And they kind of looked at each other for a little bit, and then they moved on. And they stopped with that intentionality to honor the other human that they were passing. And I was like, man, I pass by so many people all the time that I just don't even honor the beauty of the humanity of the individual that I just am passing. And so I think that's another thing that I try to do that I could do a lot better at, is being intentional in the moments of my interactions. Because today, one of the premiums that I think we took for granted, it was connection with each other. And what else are we here for on this earth except that we build community? Because doing it all alone is pretty lame. Yeah. So those are some things that come to my mind that I again say that I hope to do better, and I think that we could all do a little bit better of.
2020, you were awarded the Utah Business CXO of the Year award. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. Let me just say, those things are always tough for me because they are more an accolade for what the people of MX have done, and I just happen to be someone with a C title that gets to be able to have the face of it. Why they would choose this face, I'm not sure, but thank you.
It does take someone to create the culture.
It takes everyone to create the culture,
yes.
But certainly someone who cares about it deeply. I do.
Well, what would you say is your biggest professional success to date, and what are you looking forward to?
Well, so what we've built at MX has been a really special thing. Costa was awesome. Costa Vida was an amazing experience, and there's something really special about watching somebody take something that you've created, or the idea of something you've created, and put it into their body. I know most people don't think about food that way. We just sort of eat. But watching people take it into their body and know that that's actually becoming part of their body, and that process, it's a special thing, right? And so we really thought about that in the way that we prepared ingredients. We didn't have a freezer at the place. At Costa's, there are no freezers. There's no microwave. Everything is done with this intent of fresh. And so that was a really special thing to be a part of. Plus, we tried to build this brand, and I think that, I don't know how any of you feel, but I love Costa. Not just because of the food, yeah, but also because of the idea of live life to the fullest, right? That's sort of what you feel when you go to the ocean. that was great. I think MX is even like orders of magnitude, like something I'm more pleased with being a part of. And part of the reason is that, one, the scale of what it is of impact has just been like much larger in terms of the people that we actually have been able to have, not just as like those that are employees, but also those that are the customer and the end user. We have millions of users that leverage MX through one way, shape, or form. We've had an impact on the financial services industry, and MX will be at the epicenter of the future of banking and embedded finance. And that is awesome, not just for MX, but for this state. And to have a company that really is embedded in those kind of like first guiding principles in the way that it is, I love it. I love it. And I think that one of the next questions that was asked here was, what's been fun?
Yes. What are you looking forward to? What's been fun?
Well, I think my response when I was thinking through this and kind of processing what's been fun, I think oftentimes you think about the like cool places you got to visit or like experiences you've had. I think for me, the thing that's been the most fun, and it's also been the most challenging, has been the way that I've changed as a human being. This has been MX has been exceedingly difficult to be a part of. It has demanded so much of my humanity as a part of the way that we've built something that we often say is seemingly impossible, certainly improbable, but absolutely necessary. And those kind of moonshot types of opportunities and businesses really demand a lot out of like not just your time, but about like sort of reflecting on who you are and what you stand for, and like this importance of culture and being somebody who is a steward of that. I've had to ask myself, like, hey, how much are these first guiding principles of MX really embedded in me? And, am I cut from that cloth? And so it's changed the way that I act as a dad, the way that I act as a human, the way that I act as a husband, the way that I interface in all of my interactions with other people. And I think that's the thing I've enjoyed the most, even though it's probably the most painful. Isn't that how it is, though?
Isn't that how it is?
Yeah.
I think I love the way and the energy that you have brought to this Rev University, and the way that you see the world from such an honest and human viewpoint, with such intention in the way that you go about life and about work. So through your lenses, what opportunities do you see on the horizons for entrepreneurs?
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, I think I wrote an article about this a few months ago in Utah Business, but Utah is a special place. I started my first company. My first company was this little, I made all the mistakes that Scott talked about not making when I was just 21 years old. And it was called iMoments. We won the Utah Entrepreneurial Challenge at the University of Utah. It was like the second year that they did it. We had no clue what we were doing, but we had this idea of a social network, believe it or not, called iMoments. And it was a failure primarily as a result of just naivete, but also that year 2000 was brutal on any .com. So I take a little bit of solace in that. But even having that very early beginnings of being in this state and looking at technology, I remember just like thinking, man, are we going to always be sort of like farm territory in Lehigh? Yeah, is it going to be sort of this provincial thing? Like, do I need to go out of the state? And not too long ago, a couple of years ago, I summited Lone Peak. Do you all know where that is? So I summited Lone Peak, and I was just looking down at the valley at this road that I'd traveled from Ogden to BYU when we'd come to some of the football games as a kid. And I'm like, man, this is incredible what's changed in this ecosystem here. Like, look at what this is. And truly, I have this thesis that based upon, you look at the very early days of Norda and, the Ashton and Bastion influence with Novell and with WordPerfect, and sort of that being this like beginnings, and the fact that Utah was one of the first places that we had a node for the DARPA net, which is pretty cool. And there are a number of other little like technology like sort of moments that occurred that have then moved on to like this place where we are today. And then you rewind the clock even further, though, to a time in a season when this state was founded by people with grit and determination, values that really that really matter in terms of like being virtuous. You've got miners who had the determination to go and find things and pull them out of the earth, and we've just got this like legacy of an ethos in the state that actually almost calls to this notion of transformational technology. And so, Silicon Valley is a really interesting thing. We cannot discount the amazing ways that a lot of the companies that have come out of Silicon Valley have shaped our lives, right? But there are also some mistakes that we can observe. And there's that question of the soul in the silicon, right, that I think is part of that question. And we've kind of used this name of Silicon Slopes as a thing that is almost like the little brother or the little sister to Silicon Valley. And I say, forget that. Like, let's make Utah the summit, the Silicon Summit, the technology summit, the place where companies come to build transformational tech that is got interest in legacy. And not just legacy of like, hey, we sold to another company, but man, we built here, we stayed here, we made a difference in the world from here. And a lot has changed, obviously with COVID and being able to be distributed, but how do we make this the tech summit or the Silicon Summit of a place where real transformational tech, where the nobility of business is actually embedded in that? And what do I see as the future? Man, so much possibility, so much opportunity, particularly if we have companies with soul, if we have silicon with soul, if we have this notion of purpose balanced in the path to revenue, and that we're really solving not just problems today, but problems for the future as well. So I don't know if that answers that question, but that's my
It does
thought.
beautifully, and I think that's a wonderful note to end on before we open it up for audience questions. So, audience members, the time is now yours. If you have a question, please raise your hand. We will be running a microphone to you. Please speak into the microphone so our friends online can hear as well.
Nate, that was awesome. Really, truly awesome. And I was curious, because you're solving this big problem at MX, in banking, and it's making it wider, broader, better. Is it reaching down? I haven't checked with Ryan lately into the whole idea of the unbanked, and those people across the globe that don't have the advantages that we have.
Yeah, it's such an awesome question. One of the things that has been really exciting. So a few weeks ago, we had this event that we put on called Money Experience Summit. And I think one of the things that has been always at the thesis of MX is that we want to be an enablement platform, right? So how do we actually take data? How do we clean that up? How do we make it normalized and understood so that when you go, so that we don't have to necessarily build the experience. Someone could actually connect up into that platform and then have clean, understandable data that can then be like ingested into any kind of money experience that improves that experience. And so what was really awesome, Scott, was to see the variety of these like very niche or very specific kind of use cases of partners and clients of ours that are coding up to that platform and saying, hey, here is a group that is like a thin file, to your point, or like someone who's doesn't have a lot of history or is underbanked, but we actually can see a path to actually how we nudge them or like meet them where they're at in their financial journey, and start to give them insights of how they can like make incremental improvement. And so I would say that probably in the last 3 years of our business is really when we've started to see a lot of these use cases start to form up that have a lot of promise. I think that there's still one of the fundamental questions that I think is going to exist for a lot of these startups that are coding up to MX as a platform is how do they balance their purpose with, with the demand of revenue and a business model that can actually operate. But I think what I've been really encouraged by is the creativity and the means by which a lot of these models are like thinking, and how MX's platform is powering their solution to be able to like do that. And so the answer is absolutely yes. And another thing that along those lines that I think is really interesting is that there are all kinds of neobanks that are popping up that are very niche in the way in who they're focusing on. So kind of in the same realm, I think one of the things that's been really like exciting to watch is how equality and inequity is being solved in some of these niche neobank solutions. This morning in one of our in one of our showcases, we have every Thursday we have this showcase where we highlight everything that's going on that's like cool. And we had one of our people kind of highlight one of our ERG groups, BIPOC, that was pretty awesome about things that we're doing. And as a part of that, some of what we highlighted was a lot of the work that we're doing internally, but also how these things are occurring with some of our clients. So we have a few neobanks that are focused on just the Latino space. We have some that are serving just the Black community. And that's another area that I'm really excited by that we didn't really conceptualize, I would say, at the beginnings of MX, that the platform would have the capacity to do those kinds of things. So that's been another really neat thing. Yeah.
Hey, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your favorite screw-ups or the most important mistakes you've made in all the different stuff you've done.
Wow, there's been so many. I think one of the I recall one of the earliest experiences I had within Costa that it's one of these that I actually like comes back to my mind over and over again of just how big of a doofus I was. Is that we had a franchisee who was operating in a way that was like not in alignment with how we would have had them operating. And I remember I went in. I knew we were having this meeting, and I kind of walked into this meeting, and I walked in with this concept of like, I've got all this wise stuff I'm gonna tell as I come into this thing, and like just let them know like what they're doing wrong. And I remember just like having this conversation, and the franchisee looked at me like, "You are such a dumbass." Like, just that was the look that I was getting out of him, and realizing like I am a dumbass, right? Like right now, I am seriously just like braying at this individual, and nothing is actually connecting. I haven't made a connection with them. I haven't understood the problem and the pain that they're actually experiencing, and so it's one of those that comes back to me often of just how I still feel ashamed and like the idiocy of just not being cognizant enough to ask the question to like, hey, what's going on? Like, why are you experiencing the trouble that you are? Why are you making the decisions you are? Like, help me understand what pain you're experiencing that's, influencing your thinking. And I found that when I'm introspective and I'm willing to listen, then usually I can find good reason for why somebody's making the decisions that they've made, and that's an opportunity to share perspective and to maybe shift my own thinking, but also share back some ideas. and that typically the return on that investment's really high because now they're willing to listen. So that's the one. Man, I could go through a whole slew of when we did iMoments. That's maybe more practical. I think that I had no concept of what it meant to do an MVP and what it meant to like prove that you can solve a problem that somebody wants solved, and then to iterate on that. And I think this is one of the things that happens as an entrepreneur is you just like don't have the patience for being able to say, hey, here's my hypothesis. Is there really somebody who agrees that this is my hypothesis, and that they agree because they feel the pain themselves? And then going through the process of first trying to invalidate my hypothesis, right? And so we didn't do any of that. We just were like stacking ideas on top of each other. We that thing ballooned. We spent a lot of time and money on something in theory, and that's a recipe for closing down shop, which we did. So those are a couple. I know that 5 minutes, I don't know how much longer we go.
No, it's okay. We're good for one or two more questions.
Okay.
Nate, describe the culture at MX, how it was created, and why one of your team members would never even think about working anywhere else. And then a real last quick 10-second one, the 3 books that have impacted your life in the greatest way.
3 books?
Yeah.
Oh, man, I'm going to get in trouble. The way that, I don't know how a team member might describe culture. I'm going to have to think about that, but I would just say this. Culture, I'm a gardener, not just by name, but a gardener, like I have a garden. What I've found is that as a gardener, you will grow something in that dirt, whether you've been intentional about it or not. Something will grow there. And so I actually define culture as culture is what you cultivate and what you choose to eliminate. And as a corollary, what you choose not to cultivate and what you deliberately choose not to eliminate. And so I think that the way somebody would describe what the culture is at MX is that it is an organization that empowers the notion of being a founder, even if you're not a founder, by being capable of having the information and the capacity to go and problem solve and put that into action without having to go and make sure the executive team is okay with it, right? And so I think that's one of those things is this notion of almost the inmates running the asylum type of thing. Why they would want to stay is that I think that is an organization because of the high trust component, that people who are really smart, creative, and want to solve hard problems find interesting to flourish in. And I would say that when you tack on top of that a mission, which is to empower the world to be financially strong, and they find purpose is embedded in the actual problem solving itself, then that's why we have people at MX that don't like to leave, and then when they do leave, oftentimes come back. 3 books that have significantly influenced my life. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. I don't know if any of you have read that. It's an amazing read. It's one that I think that every human ought to read. Daniel Kahneman, who is a Nobel Art Laureate, wrote this, and it gets so into the reason why we are hardwired to be biased in our thinking. It's not just that it happened by happenstance, but that we are evolutionarily, biologically hardwired to, as a self-preservation mechanism, to actually think rapidly with pattern recognition, and why that actually that hardwiring induces us towards all kinds of biased decisioning. And I think just that awareness alone allows people to sort of go, hold up, like the way I see the world is jacked up because I can't see it in another way. So I need other humans to tell me what they're seeing for better points of view. So that's been a really important one. There's man, there's so many books that I've read that are significant. I recently just read the Tao Te Ching, which was the Tao Te Ching, which is basically the ancient Chinese script that influenced a lot of Buddhism and sort of very Eastern thought. And I think the reason why I highlight that text in particular is because it does highlight probably an area of thinking that not many of us spend time looking at, but is just embedded in really important first guiding principles of mindfulness. There's a concept in the Tao Te Ching which is the essence of water, and I think we experience so many things in our life that are externalities, and it's oftentimes not about what's happened to us. It's actually very rarely about what's happened to us, and it's about how we react to it. And then there are a number of spiritual texts that I've read that are probably the most important to me in terms of influencing who I am. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Perfect. Well, the last question that we will end with is, what is something fun that your success has allowed you to do?
Well, I think I answered that one of like being able to be changed.
Yes. Let's focus more on something fun you and your family get to do because of your success.
Man, that's such a tough thing for me to answer, candidly. I mean, I think you don't have to be successful to enjoy this, but I think it's one of these things that I've had the opportunity to do since I was just a little kid, and maybe this answers the question of I'm much like most of us, I feel like I've won the lottery of just like the opportunity of the kind of humanity I've been able to experience. So in the richness of life, and I've seen more opportunity to be able to experience this in different ways, but we have a treasure down in the lower south corner of the state, and it's called Lake Powell, and it is just like an amazing place. I think that obviously experiencing that, like I said, is not a matter of my success, but it's one of those places that I really do love to experience, and I think we ought to experience it more on our feet and in a tent. But I have had the opportunity to be able to experience it in a more luxurious way since, not because of my own amenities, but others who've been gracious enough to include me. So that's been a fun thing to do.
I love it. And Lake Powell is a beautiful place to go. So what a wonderful thing. Nate, thank you so much for being here. We do have a gift for you, and I left it in the back.
This has been a gift enough. I don't know if I need anything else, but thank you.
Well, good. Oh, good. Perfect. Give us one more round of applause for Nate.